All right, I'll start. Hey guys, my name is Prajal Kulkarni. I've been working with Flipkart for almost 6 years now. Uh, uh, we've been initiated the data privacy, data security charter in Flipkart uh, a little more than a year now, and we are seeing the pain points that as a company Flipkart is facing with respect to data and privacy. So we have also initiated a privacy team within Flipkart, which is taking care of the privacy part of Flipkart Internet Properties. So a lot of things that have been I personally have seen in this space happening in Flipkart, and a lot of learning in this area. And definitely as part of these sessions, a lot of to and fro and thought sharing has been happening. So this is my third session that I have joined, and looking forward to this one.
Great. Thanks, Prajal. So I think, Samir, you have someone else to pull in also today as we're discussing community resources. Rajat?
Hey, this is Rajat. Yeah, this is also my third meetup. I have been working in big data space for quite a few years in a couple of companies, Voric and Cubol. And for the last couple of years, I've been consulting with companies on databases, data governance, and data security. Right? And thrown out a few open source tools that a couple of companies are using. That's where my interest in this space started when uh, I saw more and more projects in data governance coming up through my consultancy gigs. And I figured out, even though I worked in databases for quite some time, I didn't know enough about GDPR, data security, so on and so forth. And that's where my interest in this topic comes from.
Thanks, Rajat. And we also have Tausif, who spoke last month. Tausif, if you can do a quick introduction of yourself. Tausif is joining us from UAE, unless you ported yourself to another time play into another zone. Tausif, can you hear us? Okay, I think. Okay, so today's agenda is last month, Tausif presented on the GDPR implementation that he was working on. Today, Satish will be presenting the GDPR implementation that Zeotap has done. So it'll be probably good to compare both the approaches. I know Rajat's on a weak bandwidth, but Rajat, if you can post comments as you kind of hear through the presentation today, and if there's anything in terms of parallels that we can draw. And of course, Tausif is here, so he'll be able to look at his own work in a different light as Satish is presenting. Satish should be here in another couple of minutes. After that, we have Venkat, who has been building the PDP checklist at Scribble. And the idea here is that he'd like to present this, and I've also been insisting that we should present this and look at ways in which some of us can contribute and look at community resources. FYI, since last month, we've been running these different meetings on non-personal data. We've had 4 meetings, including one that happened last evening, where we discussed the impact of the non-personal data on cloud startups and on startups and innovation. And so we have some of the regulars from there. And I think one of the questions that I see both Venkat and Samir debating regularly in one of the Telegram groups is about the question of how prepared are we to handle some of these regulations, which clearly will impact engineering, data governance, etc. And that there is no way for us to kind of say wish away the regulations. And so how do we kind of build a voice? I think, Samir, this might be a good time to introduce yourself and some of the work that you do at Arca. So Samir will lead the discussion after the two presentations on this topic. Samir, over to you.
Yeah, Zainab, thanks. You're able to hear me, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah. Can hear
Yeah,
you,
okay.
Samir.
Yeah, so yeah, I can. So just a bit of a background. Me and Shivangi, my co-founder, we Parka about 8 years ago. And since then, while we are both from the security side, we also got focused on the privacy things. Took about 5 years in between to build out the whole privacy related pieces. And now I think we have a decent lead in terms of training people as well as advising groups, plus rolling out implementations and all that. as a company, we work with small and medium as well as large enterprises in terms of putting together their privacy programs, helping them run, also work as an outsourced function most of the time. So that's just the company background. Over and above that, one of the things that we have been looking at doing and we've been consciously working on is to
Okay, Samir, we lost your voice. I don't know if. Okay. Okay, we lost Samir's voice. Let's see if Satish is here. Okay.
hello.
Yeah, Samir. We lost you for a bit.
Yes, I thought so. I think something happened suddenly. Even I didn't realize what happened. So yeah, I was saying, we've been mostly sort of demystifying the law in conversion to an implementation guide. And over a period of time, we realized that we needed to work on guides which are easier to implement and figure out as well. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is going into a privacy by design sort of frame, where in fact one of the discussions that we've been having continuously with Zaina, Venkat, and everybody else is to be able to find and weave a community around it so that multiple people can contribute and also use it. The plan, of course, is to open source so that it becomes a good starting point for people in the data aggregator side to be able to use it. People, while developing a product, can use this to create their own setups as well, and is in a much easier frame to pick in and move forward also. So that's the idea behind that, and that's what we've been working on mostly. And there are a lot of people, I think, within the group and otherwise who we know are sort of independently trying to figure things and do things as well. So now we are looking at saying how do we kind of put it together so that as a collective group we go out and are able to sort of self-regulate as well. So irrespective of the regulation, it helps us from purely a business and a technology standpoint also.
Thanks, Samir. So I see that
So
Satish.
that's
Yeah,
good
sorry.
from my side. Yeah.
Thanks, Samir. So Satish is
Good.
Satish, do you want to share your screen and maybe a little bit of introduction? I think there are some people here who may already know you.
Yeah, I see a couple of people from last week. Samir, Naman, Venkat.
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, yeah, sure. Okay, just a minute because
Yeah,
you
sure, no
gave me
problem.
a last minute time change.
Yes, sorry about it. I just realized that there are too many meetings
I was
today.
under impression it's at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. So just I'll start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the session again. And also thank you for taking your time to attend the same. Today, a session, what I'm going to present is I'm going to take you through the blueprint on how Zeotap achieved GDPR compliance. And compliance has been one of the core values of Zeotap, given we are handling telecom data. And when the GDPR regulations kicked in, we saw it as a big opportunity for us to showcase evidence of the same. We took a product approach to the whole problem, which treats compliance as a first-class citizen across all its layers. And my talk today is more leaning towards the product and tech aspects of things, not on the cybersecurity controls and compliance process aspects. So with that, let me start sharing my screen. I'll probably take off my video as well because last week we had some problem with the video.
Sure.
Where is the presentation? Beep. There you go. Just a minute. There's not the share. It is not coming up.
Okay. Yeah.
It's probably and show. share screen. Yeah, is it seen now?
Yeah, we can see your this thing. Yeah, we can see the screen now. Yeah.
The whole screen is fine?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's start. This time a formal introduction because last week I didn't do that much. My name is Satish KS. I head the engineering here in Zeotap, and my responsibilities include all the engineering delivery strategy as well as aspects of technical architecture. I come with around 18 years of experience in IT and have been fortunate to spend last 8 years in the big data stacks. And I'm passionate about the tech evolution from both business as well as the core tech perspective. Another thing I thought I would mention in this forum is I'm also passionate about my art Tai Chi. Okay, that is my LinkedIn profile. And introduction about Zeotap. Zeotap, we are a Berlin-based startup. We started in 2015. 2014 was this thing, but operation started in 2015. And we are a customer intelligence platform which enables brands to better understand their customers. So how we do it is we provide three items. We provide a 360 view of the customer data. We provide identity resolution. And in ad tech, there is a jargon called activation. We also enable activation. So this is a SaaS plus DaaS offering. We were originally a data as a service company because we were only dealing with third-party data. But given the tech stack we built, we also repurposed it for a SaaS style of offering where brands can directly manage their first-party data and optionally use the third-party data as well for further enrichments. And every data company has a theme. We are people-centric data collectors, and the data can be categorized broadly as the identity data assets and profile data assets. And another style of categorization is deterministic, what actually we collect based on deterministic identifiers. And second thing is, based on our patented algorithms inside the company, we do some inferences and derivations. These we stamp it as probabilistic data, which we supply for our customers as well. And as I told, we are fully privacy and GDPR compliant. We cater to close to 150 data partners, both inbound ingress as well as egress. Currently, the main stacks we are integrated with in any company on any layer is the ad tech layer and the martech layer. So that's about Zeotap. And GDPR, by now, it is no more tribal knowledge. Given the PDP bill and everything, everybody is having a good level of awareness or decent level of awareness. But still, I just jotted down a couple of points based on our early memories, because this is a 2-year-old law. It is a EU data protection and privacy bill. It became enforced in May 25th, 2018. And when it came, it had an effect across the whole organization, be it the business teams, the data sourcing team, product and engineering, legal, as well as the security and IT team. Every team had some impact because of this law coming into play in Europe. Couple of broad things it talks about is, one is the personal data. When we talk about personal data, it means the data collected about any person which is identifiable to him, and he is also a EU citizen. So that is called as the personal data. Second thing is the user rights. What are the rights the EU citizen has on the data which is collected by any organization? And what are the access rights? Access right is both from the user perspective as well as the internal organization perspective. What are the access rights and security controls to be there? And it has some recommendations, broad level recommendations. It doesn't go to saying that this is the encryption algorithm you have to use or this is the technology you have to use, but it broadly recommends how you want to handle your data, how you want to transport your data, how you want to store your data. These kind of recommendations are given. And of course, there are audit requirements. With any compliance, any law and any regulation, there are always audit requirements. And the scariest of all, it carried heavy penalties, which could be a make or break for a startup. If you're not compliant, you can as well shut your shop and go away. So that is the kind of penalties it had. And it had two categories of companies which were handling data. And Zeotap fell into both categories. We were both a data processor as well as a data controller. We became a data controller because internally, we were stitching the device IDs of the person's user with the profile. It may not be directly stitched together, but we had the inference mechanism. And that is one of our patents, which we had, of how the telecom identities are stitched together to the profile of a person. So by that means, we also became a data controller, and we had to be compliant on both angles. Moving on, uh, as I told you, we took a productish approach. So whenever these kind of regulations come in, first thing you will get from your security and compliance team is a huge Excel sheet, which will ask you to categorize all the data assets, put everything in picture and all these things. Don't fall into the trap. Building a product is sometimes much faster than doing this operational exercise. And that's exactly what we did in Zeotap. So when we read through the GDPR from the legal lens as well as the business lens and the product lens, what we did is we distilled it into a bunch of product requirements. And that is what I have listed here. So one of the prime requirement of GDPR was, how do I handle sensitive data? Sensitive data means data of a person's ethnicity, data of his health, his actual PI information, which I have categorized as another this thing. How do you manage that? So these all come under sensitive data management. And second thing is, it talked about, by default, the consent is like opt out. You have to be explicit about the consent you are collecting. It shouldn't be like an implicit consent. You take a single consent for everything and you take it as a user consent. Instead of that, it talked about explicit consent management. Then the third thing is, how do you manage PIIs, the personally identified information like IP address, name, email, and phone numbers. Fourth is, how do you manage the user information? What is the product you are going to give out for managing his user information? These are a bunch of rights he has, like rights to be forgotten, rights to be erasure, rights to portability, as well as right to understand what data he has and what are the processing we are doing. And access management. Of course, access management, I'm not going to cover that much in detail in this presentation, because this was moved totally to the IT and infra folks in terms of putting the access management as per the minimum privileged access policy, whatever is applicable. Then the auditing requirements came in as a product requirements, and a couple of other remaining requirements are like sometimes very specific to the companies. For example, Zeotap has a use case where we create cohorts from the profile data. That is kind of a segmentation or audience creation from the data. So in this, we have some additional requirements to protect ourselves, saying that, say, a cohort should be of minimum 10K size. Beyond that, don't export the cohort somewhere outside. Okay. And what are the TTLs? Say, for if it's a cookie, what is the TTL I'll apply so that I don't have a very stale cookie still in my system? And if it's a MAID, what is the TTL I'll apply? So these kind of custom requirements always some companies would be having. So that we also had those requirements. It also came into the product. Then, of course, the PII management, and from security perspective, they'll say, okay, if your data is at rest or if you're transporting data to this thing, use these levels of security. Say you need a layer 4 level security, you need a transport level security, and you also need data encryption. If it is encryption, this is the standards you used to use. So these all kind of rules come from the security teams as well. And of course, when you're becoming compliant, you need to scan through your current existing all data sets. So this one-time requirement pretty much should be applicable to any company for a one-time bootstrap or data cleanup as that is asked. So that also became as a product requirement, which was handled in a pretty much operational manner. After this product was built, we ran it initially on the all data sets, and we kind of created this thing. It became like a test bed, internal test bed, if you think about it, for us to figure out whether what we have built is working fine or not. All right.
So Satish,
Yes.
I didn't understand cohort. These are some derived attributes
Yeah.
for every individual. What was the particular issue here?
Well, the thing is, see, you have this collections created out of any data sets, right? So if you have multiple collections, there is a way you can kind of come back to the original identifier, even if you have pseudonymized or de-identified the person, isn't it? So what we do is the cohort, we put up a threshold saying that if say I'm creating an audience segment of say I have 500 dimensions. It's actually what we have. We have close to 500 to 600 dimensions. Suppose a person is able to run a query putting all these filters and he's able to extract 10 records, or say he's able to extract one record, what happens is that privacy is gone. He's able to take the exact person and the identifier, right? So it is like from SQL language, it's a filter query with a where clause on the columns. But we want to ensure this cohort size, what comes out of it, should be of a minimum size so that it cannot be misused for de-identification purposes by cross-combining with other data. But of course, this is not a machine learned or intelligent threshold we have kept. We have just kept a normal threshold, what we deemed as should be sufficient for us. Does that make sense?
Yes, understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Satish, is the number of filters the minimum you are putting or the different way?
I'm sorry, your voice didn't come out clearly.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm saying, when you say minimum size, is it a minimum size or the maximum size that you're looking at? You said you guys
minimum.
all find dimensions are used. Somebody will be able to identify.
No, it is minimum size, because when I run the query, I'll get a couple of records, right? So I'll get 100 records or 1,000 records or 10,000 or 1 million records. So if the record size is below that minimum thing, we won't be allowing that.
Oh, okay.
Got it.
Yeah. It's mostly about anonymization.
Yeah,
or preventing or making it harder to reverse engineer. If I know that person has cohort 1, 3, and 25, I shouldn't be able to apply that filter in SQL and match it to 2 records. If it is 10,000 records, or as the larger the group, the more safer you are as far as identifying an individual is concerned. That's all.
Yeah, that's exactly the principle. The larger the group, it is difficult to reverse engineer to come back to the original identity of the person. Okay, so moving on, if we kind of split the product into a conceptual model, always compliance acts on a couple of entities, right? You have those entities has to be given the first-class citizenship across their architecture, and that's exactly what we arrived at. So if you look at it, the primary entities are here, the user and the data assets themselves. And in terms of processing, you need some kind of compliance processing, which can permeate across all the layers of processing in your system, across all your products as well. Then all these, whatever we are talking about in the previous slide, right? If I want to block a sensitive data, I want to validate a sensitive data, drop it, or if I have to keep a hashing, encryption, if I have to validate the hash length, everything becomes a policy or a rule set. So that becomes another first-class entity in your product. And another thing based on the previous requirement, which is one is the consent. If it's opt-out, you need deletion. Deletion is not simple in really large data sets, especially when you're storing across multiple data layers. You might have in GCS buckets, you might have in BigQuery, you might have in some other database. So the whole deletion processor workflow itself needs a focused handling, I would say. Same thing applies to TTL as well. And the top 4, which I have mentioned, is the consent, audit, user, as well as the data asset. Okay, so I've just layered it as what are the logical entities here, what are the processing entities here, and what is the rule-based entities here. So based on this, we move ahead and started creating the tech architecture for that. The way I'm going to present the tech architecture is more of a bottom-up approach. So we'll see the various items which we actually put together, and finally how they combine to achieve the necessary use cases. Okay. So the first thing, okay, what you need, and without which you should be really fearful to call yourself compliant, is a clean data inventory and a data catalog and a lineage system as well. Lineage is something bit specific for Zeotap. We had a use case even before compliance to have a lineage. I'll just explain it. So you need to know who's giving your data, which partner is giving, what is the region it is coming from, what are the categories of data, whether he's giving me only identity information, whether he's giving me apps data, or he's giving me interest-based data, or he's giving me URL browsing data. So all these has to be there. The categorization has to be there. Then you also need to be aware of what this data contains. What is the schema or registered schema of a data partner? What are the field types, whether it's numeric or text or string, or it is like some regex. Then what is a cardinality? A zip code could be a very high cardinality item, whereas a age could be can be bucketed and created into a 5 cardinality or 4 cardinality item, as well as gender could be just 3 cardinalities, right? And what are the expected values or expected regex and all these things. So this is another primary thing you need. And how do you describe the data? Whether it is a raw data set, you have inferred it, it is derived by yourself. If you have derived, how it is derived. Okay. Then next thing is, what is a version? Always when the data is flowing from system to system, right? Downstream system might be acting on a completely different version from what the upstream system is currently handling. So this is something the whole data flow should be aware of. What is the version in that time point, what it is acting upon. So the version and timestamp of the data set is very important. Then the last point is talking about the lineage. Why we needed lineages? As I mentioned, we collect data from multiple third-party sources, right? So suppose there is a user data, his interest data is coming from one data partner, and say his income data is coming from another data partner. How do I attribute that? That means I need to know at each attribute level which data partner has contributed to that knowledge of that attribute, right? So this is something which we have and which came in handy when we had to do the opt-out management downstream as well, okay? Then the second thing is, another important thing is resolution of conflict. I can have partner A saying this particular entity is of age 20, whereas another data partner can say this particular entity is of age 70, right? 20 is compliant, 17 is a minor. I cannot technically hold the data. So what do I do? So I use this to give benefit of doubt to compliance and say, okay, I won't even process this entity. Let me drop the whole record because I'm in doubt. And this has other implications as well. There is a whole layer of data quality and I would say a patented goal set, which kind of helps me in resolving the conflict, but it is kind of a priority queue. If you look at it, compliance takes the highest priority, then the quality takes the next priority, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are a couple of items which we had to build, which some were built and some we were building at that time to achieve this. This is built over RDBMS and Elasticsearch stack, and it has a microservice and library support. Library support is mainly for the Spark processing aspects. You'll see these 2 points repeating again and again, the microservice and library support. And when the catalog is updated as during the, say, when a data partner comes in, when his data set's getting onboarded. Is there any problem with my voice?
No,
It's
no,
coming
it's
out clearly, right? Okay. When it is onboarding, as well as during the processing, right? When the data process is happening across the layers, you have some updates happening to the catalog as well. Like the classic thing is the data point, the knowledge attribution, which is the outcome of the processing. Now, when we were building this I'm talking about end 2017 and early 2018, there were no cloud-based native tools or tools like Apache Atlas, which can provide you these capabilities pretty much out of the box. Now we are also looking at using any of the specialist tool set and migrate to it, so that the management and downstream involvement is much easier on all these aspects, right? And this has evolved to accommodate more items as well, like the quality stats and verifications as well. Yeah, so this is the first bit of technology in the whole architecture which was built. Any questions there? Okay, we'll do one thing. We'll take the questions in the end. Let me run through the slides.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay, sure, Satish.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Probably we can note the questions and take it in the end. Okay, the second entity is the policy management itself. Now, the policy is nothing but rule. If, say, for this data partner, the schema, this is the registered schema. If more schema is coming, raise alert. If the email is not coming in hashed format, hash length is less than 42, then it is not a SHA for SHA hash, drop that record or raise alert to the data sourcing team. So these kind of things. So it's a combo of two things. One is the actual rules and another is the actions. Actions, we have a out of the box set of actions, as well as it is extensible to create custom actions as well. Drop action, alert action, null actions, and all these things. I'll just take you through some example in the next slides to help understand this. Okay. And this also has a hierarchical support in terms of the policy. If this policy is there, then this also has to be applied kind of hierarchical support is also there. And again, it comes with the same kind of tech stack, which I told in the previous slide decks. One additional thing is, if you think about it, the policies and actions are not defined by the engineers. It is defined by the domain experts. So we need to give CRUD, or create, read, update, and delete via APIs to power users. They could be your legal team, there could be your some account management team, or that could be even your product team. So this is one additional thing over and above the catalog which is being added. Catalog is more or less, it's like a self-inferred thing. Okay, fine. I've just put a sample of flattened sample of how the policy table is going to look like in the RDBMS. Elasticsearch I couldn't take out because it was coming out a bit bigger than what I expected. Okay. Now, next thing, you need to understand this concept a bit more. This has two use cases. Okay. One is I am separating the actual runtime parameters for the rules and the thresholds for the rules from the actual rule itself. This gives me, say, tomorrow for CCPA, if I have to change a different set of parameters for the runtime, I can put it against the CCPA laws. Say for PDP, tomorrow something else is the threshold and runtime parameters, I can change it. So it is, in database parlance, this is called the normalization, which helps in more flexibility and evolutionary control as well. So what happens is, this is a classic equation. The function of policy plus the function of the parameters which the compliance catalog provides gives you the action. So let's take two actions, for example. Suppose, say, the policy is a schema policy and it is talking about age, and the parameter age threshold is 18, and the action executed is drop the record. Drop action is executed. There is another policy saying that device IP address policy, if it is present in this data partner, that is a parameter. If it is present, it's just a Boolean parameter. It is present or absent. Present means replace it with null. You take the null action on top of it. Another major flexibility which we had because of separating this catalog is the data layer pretty much has many encoded parameters. When I say encoded parameters, the interest, for example, since we are in catering to ad tech and many ad tech data partners are there for us, they give interest in the IAB style coding, which is IAB underscore 1, IAB underscore 2, IAB underscore 3. Like this, you could have custom jargons coming into your data platform. But that may not make sense for your backend as well as the Unity user team. So you need to have some translation. So this catalog helps, though I have named it as a compliance catalog, it is little broader than the compliance catalog. So it has this blacklist, whitelist, and all these translations so that the backend and UI can consume it as well. Yeah, makes sense. So these two slides, from these three slides, let's see how a Spark processing pipeline is going to work like. Now, if you look at it, whatever I talked about till these three slides, they all fall under, in some way, your data governance layer. I have a couple of other services which I have put here. I'll just take a couple of seconds to explain that. Config service is nothing but the actual Spark job properties and Spark config itself. Because for each of the workflow, each of the item which is being processed, it needs a separate set of properties. Those all are maintained by the config service. And the data catalog, we just talked about. Then the policy store, we just talked about. And path catalog is something interesting. This is for our trigger-based mechanisms. So we, just to give you the problem statement there, all my data partners, they just put data into various GCP paths, GCS paths, okay, the cloud buckets. And this path catalog is actually tracking them, and it helps us in triggering the workflow at the right times. So, and once that workflow is triggered, it also knows next workflow has been triggered and registered as a path which is available. So it is kind of a metadata on the pipeline itself. So that is a path catalog. Then last one is the compliance catalog, which we again talked about. What is happening here? Say you have a data partner, you have a data set of the data partner coming in. First, using the governance mechanism, it will figure out what is the schema level policy. It will do the processing. It will take the actions and write the relevant audit logs. Then it will go into a loop where it will look into the value level policies. Value level policies, if you think about it, it has to be applied on record level or the row level. So for each record, it will look at the value level policies and take the actions. After that is done, you get a compliant data set. Okay, so this is how all these three together is getting actuated into an actual workflow. So like this, we have multiple pipelines, but what I'm trying to say is I'm just saying the sample of how one Spark process is going to work here. Okay.
Just one detailed question here. The Spark logs you pull from the individual containers and post-process.
Yeah, into Yarn. So it goes into the Yarn logs, and there is much more nuances there. There is a kind of a pre-process, core process, and a post-process as well. And we have achieved a level of at least once collection of the logs. So that is the way it is done. So from the Spark, it goes to the Yarn logs. We route it into that. And from there, there is agents running, which will put it into Kafka. Okay, next comes the privacy opt-out and consent. So opt-out means the user is saying, just take me out of your system. And there are nuanced opt-out as well as nuanced consent. You can opt-out, and there is something called what are the purpose you're opting out from. It could be a blanket opt-out or a purpose level opt-out. Same applies for giving consent as well. Blanket consent is given or purpose-driven consent is given. Zeotap has three modes of collecting consent. Given we are a data controller as well, we are obliged to create a privacy website as well as an app. So that is what I have mentioned as the Zeotap consent that flows into my API, into my backend system, and comes into the pipelines. Second is the data partner. When I say partner, who's giving me data into the system? Now, this is again a multifold mechanism because some data partner gives us a cloud transfer, some gives us a SFTP. So it is similar to ingestion, how I get my opt-out and the consent data. Also, there is a HTTP real-time API where they hit when they are doing some syncing stuff as well. Okay, so all these mechanisms are available for the partner as well as the consumers. And based on how my consent is coming into the system, I have three modes of handling within this. So if it is Zeotap, it is always global because that is directly coming to you as the user is saying, opt me out of your system, opt me out of Zeotap. That means I have to go and nuke this guy or nuke this entity across my data sets. And also wherever I have given downstream, I have to notify them to take him out of their systems as well, because I have given the data point. Whereas when it comes to the data partner level, if you remember, I talked about the lineage and all these things. What I'll do is I'll only nuke the knowledge which the data partner has specifically given me, be it the identities. If he has given me email and some profile data, I'll take off those email and those data sets. If he has given me email and a couple of other identifiers and a couple of identifiers alone, I just take all those from my system. Okay. The third is the consumer level. Consumer level is even more interesting. When I say consumer, consumer is our channel partners. It could be Google, Facebook, Instagram, and all these fellows. So once the user opt-outs of Google, Google comes and tells me this guy is opt-outed out of my system. When I am sending this process data to him, right, at that time, I have to filter him out. See, this user, still I can send to the other channels because he hasn't opted out of the other channels. But he has opted out of Google. So I have to filter it from the Google system alone. So this is why we have three kinds of handling, the global, partner level, and consumer level. And that is all again run by a various processes. It's very difficult to put all the process slides here. So I'm just giving you a verbal explanation. Hope that is explaining things. If you have any doubts, ask me after the session. Okay. And what happens is from this consent, I'll show you in the next slide. There is a consent object which is constructed, which has the identities on which the consent has to be applied and what is the purpose of the consent. And the latest development in the past 1 year has been, we also became the TCF compliant. TCF is the Transparency and Consent Framework, which came from something called the International Advertising Bureau Consortium, which helps in managing consent at a blanket level across the cookies and the MAIDs, mobile identifiers. because that is the identities primarily Zeotap works on. It is the browser cookies and the mobile identifiers. Next. So I just explained. Yes.
How big is the data set? Are we talking billions? Are we talking millions?
Any data set I'm talking about is what I'm operating on is on billions. So just to give you a gist of data, I have close to 30 billion identifiers in my system and 8 to 9 billion profiles. And each, the profile, as I told you, the number of columns could go up to 500 to 600 as well. Okay, and it has some internal. I have nested column support as well. So it's kind. We started as a data company, right? So we have, I would say, grown a heavy data asset, and we have to manage that. So I'll probably brief about a couple of tech stacks we are using also down the line. So this is how the consent pipeline looks like. As I told, I'm getting from data partner A, probably the second thing I should have given as a data consumer B and Zeotap. And what is meant by this ID enrich is, see, if Zeotap is giving, right? Zeotap, we can get consult from my email ID, or I can get from a cookie, or I can get from my MID. So since I have to do a blanket nuke, what I have to do is I have to figure out what all the other IDs that is linked to this particular email ID. First thing is I have to hash the email ID because he is sending me an email to privacy.zeotap.com. I have to convert to hash. Then based on the hash, I have to enrich all the identifiers which are linked to the hash. Then I convert everything to the standard format. And same applies for data partner. What happens is if he gives ID, I have to figure out what are all the IDs which is coming to that data partner, which the data partner has given me in the past. And I have to link them all together and create the consent object and the consent tags. Tags is nothing but the purposes which you're talking about. So you have a yes, no, and if it's yes, no, what are the purposes? And currently for no, we are not supporting granular purposes. For a no, we just go ahead and nuke it because yeah, we just go and nuke it. We are not doing any further processing there. So that is why I mentioned as a deletion is one of the activity. And another is for the processing, whether it can be allowed to processing or not is given by the consent processor library as a Boolean for any of the downstream processing. Okay. So this is about the consent data flow, a sample data flow of how the consent looks like. It's not a sample actually. This is how the production also looks like more or less. Next comes the user management. As I told, since we are a controller, this privacy website and privacy app, how we are managing, right? So the primary key here, as I have been alluding to in the past 15-20 minutes, is like mainly the MAIDs. By MAIDs, what I mean is the mobile advertising IDs, which is the IDFA for Apple and advertisement ADID for Google. Then you have the cookies, browser-based cookies. You have the email hash, you have the phone hash. These are the four key or four identifiers which Zeotap collect. We don't collect IP address as of today. We don't collect actual names of the person. We don't collect SSN and other things. So these are a couple of things in our blacklist which we don't collect. For Zeotap, these are the identifiers we work with. And we had to create an app. We have to create a mobile app and the website, and they interact to the API, the backend API, which is based out of Java Play framework, something like a Drop Wizard and all these frameworks. And given the size of our data set, we heavily use blooms so that the identifiers are quickly checked whether it is present or not present. And all the identifiers currently is stored in a DB called Aerospike, which is, I would say, a fast transactional OLTP transactional read-write database. So that is being used for all my identifiers for this particular purpose as well. Okay. Okay, the next item, we covered a bunch of the items in the product slide, which I showed, as well as the requirement slides. Next is, which is again very important, is audit. So the audit decision we took is we'll take the logging itself as the audit, and we take all the logs and store it in buckets so that it can be loaded to OLAP database of your choice. It could be Redshift or BigQuery or Snowflake or Plain Hive and Presto, and you do your analytics and analysis. But only key there is we didn't want to make an unstructured log. We wanted a common log across the organization, especially for the GDPR compliance. So we abstracted it out with a compliance logger, the library as well as a microservice. What happens is the log grammar includes the items which I have listed there, the violation type, which product is giving me that log, what is the data flow stage, what is the action taken, what is the timestamp of the action when it was taken, what is the timestamp when the violation actually occurred, and a couple of other metadata around the log as well, right? So this service is pretty much used across our layers, so that across Spark as well as the backend layers, and we aggregate the log into a single place, and it is stored on, I don't remember the bucket, I think it's month-wise bucket, because compliance logger is not that heavy compared to, say, application logs. So currently, if I remember, it is month-wise buckets, and this can be loaded and you can analyze what all has actions happened and what has how many consents has come in and all these kind of things. You can do some basic analysis and forecasting. Yeah. Okay, putting it all together. So as I told, compliance is a first-class citizen. This is a complete compliance service. It provides capabilities over the blacklist management, sensitive data management, the user data services, audit management. The compliance workflow is what is triggering those Spark workflows and determines which layer has to apply what policies and rule sets. And these are my ingestion pipelines on the left-hand side, and these are the egress pipelines. This is the only slide I had before, so which I used to showcase to say our outside deck. So I just reused that, and it's a pretty old slide. I didn't rework on it. And if you look at it, on the top layer is the actual apps which Zeotap provides for the opt-out, and there is a user and the consent API layer, user API layer, and this admin layer is what I talked about for the policies and the catalog management, which is not exposed to this web app. So this admin layer is actually used only by the power users, for the API based users, and it's just a representative from the various stores which we talked about till now to achieve this the whole use cases, right? So this is how, if you look at it from a 50,000 feet view, how the architecture is going to look like for this, the whole product. Next is any architecture, you will have a couple of requirements, non-functional requirements, like how it scales, how resilient it is it extensible, and all these things. So this is from our own experience. When we deployed this particular system in place, we had close to 80 workflows. Now we have more than 400 workflows, and we are still scaling on a day-to-day basis. And all workflows has a certain set of process of how this has to be, how this is initiated in the Spark library, and how it takes care of the things, right? Second thing is we also did a AWS to GCP migration, and it was a decent, fairly simple lift and shift for us, this whole compliance angle as well, this process as well. Then second is when CCPA came into play, we could tweak the policies accordingly for the US and specifically to the CA, California region, to make it extensible and accommodate those aspects as well. Of course, there were some changes. I don't remember everything off my head, but as far as I remember, we could accommodate everything without engineering effort. Just with the testing and sanity effort, we were able to cover that. So this is largely the pipeline summary of how the things have been deployed. Next item is infra and security validations. I thought I'll briefly touch upon this. Zeotap, all the infra is split region-wide. We are very, very careful about data sovereignty. Whatever data is in EU, it is always in EU. Data storage as well as processing. Same applies for US and same applies for India as well. And the access rights controls, we have a couple of certifications which I'll touch upon. So it's, as I mentioned in the talk before, it is based on minimum privileged access across all the data sets. And we have a chief data officer as well as a security person who does a quarterly audit on this and figures out if there are any exceptions and passes on recommendations, which is taken up by the infra team. Then we don't mix the ID and profile except during runtime processing. Always the ID and the profile is pseudonymized. In the sense, during ingestion itself, if I get an email ID or a cookie ID, what happens is a pseudonymized ID, which we internally call as a ZU ID or a Zeotap unique ID, is identified for each of the user profile entity. And at any point in time, if you want to do analysis of, say, general age bucket analysis or general interest bucket analysis, or how much of the fill rate I have, you operate on this identifier, which doesn't give the actual identifier of these sets. That is happening only during that access is allowed only for the runtime applications. Then another security recommendation is the data at rest encryption. Pretty much all the data at rest, be it in GCS buckets or anything, it's encrypted. We also use BigQuery, which is again encrypted data at rest. And the email and phone numbers we hash. This has some nuances in the sense we support all three hashes. If a data partner says I can use all three hashes, we go ahead and use MD5, SHA, SHA-256 as well, applied for phone number. And we use uppercase, lowercase, and ignore case. So in all, this hash combination itself is like a 9 plus 6, 15 total combinations are available in our systems. It may not be always the same fill rate because of the contracts we enter into the data partner. So these are all a couple of other items I thought would be useful for this forum. So I presented this as well. And the hash, all are validated. We have every hash has a length parameter, so you can easily validate, as well as the email and phone number. There are regexes against which you can validate. So these are all IDs which you can validate, unlike a cookie, which can be any random UUID, right? So whereas these identifiers, which are PIS, you have some levels of validations as well on top of it. GDPR doesn't recommend any certification out of the box, but if you have all these certifications, it kind of enhances your stance in saying that, okay, we can believe this company is compliant. So we have gone through ISA 27001 certification for past 3 years. We did a recertification this year as well. And same applies for the CSA star certificate from BSI. I don't remember this thing. It's some British Standard Institute or whatever. Then the e-privacy seal from I think it is from the EU forum, one of the forum. We also have that. I don't know what will be applicable for the PDP down the line, if there is going to be some other ISO stack or whatever. But yeah, given all the stacks we have built, we are very confident that we could just swim the PDP bill through as well. And current additional developments which are happening is, if you look at it, when I was going through the slides, there were a couple of manual processes which can induce human errors. Like when the data partner is onboarded, there could be some manual errors in terms of saying the schema has so and so items, whereas the additional item comes in. Of course, there are some validations present there, but still there are human errors which can creep in. What we are looking at is current development is going on around NLP, AML based scanning of the data sets and application. Of course, there are major cost challenges of productionizing this as well. But this is some active development which is going on in terms of both for the data quality as well as the compliance aspects. This is the current development which is happening in the organization across the data layers. And yeah, that ends my slide show. We can move on to the question and answer sessions. Hopefully there were some useful pointers for everybody and some takeaways. I'll just stop the sharing unless anybody asks for anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Satish. There are actually quite a few questions, so let me try to club some questions together. I think one question, let me start with the most recent question. This is from Tausif. He asks that since you collect data from user browsers directly, how do you deal with unstructured data like password reset tokens, which also get collected and can be used to uniquely identify a customer?
Yeah, so currently we are not collecting passport from the third-party perspective. So that is under the first-party preview that is under development currently, the authenticated traffic solution. So once that is coming in, we need to, we don't have a current solution, to be honest. We are looking at various aspects of how to manage that as well. So yeah, I know this forum is divided between, say, a first party data collector, like say, for example, if you take any of our e-com providers, they are a first party data provider. So being a third party aggregator, we have some contractual clauses saying that I won't take this data from you at all. So that is what is protecting us. But of course, once we venture into the first party data, these are some challenges which we are going to face.
Tausif, if you have a question further, you could either put it in the chat or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I'll move on to the next question, which is likely related, which is from Naushad, which is on what does GDPR say about data which is scraped through social media for publicly available posts?
Which is scraped through social media on publicly available
post. Naushad, you want to directly ask your question because it might be open to interpretation also.
Yeah, so if the organization collects the data by scraping the social media post, what is the GDPR stand on that?
Okay, so I'm not sure of the GDPR post, but if you look at it, what you have to do is you have to be, at the end of the day, you are acting as a third-party data collector there. So from GDPR perspective, if you ask my opinion, you have to register yourself as a data processor. And whatever is applicable for the data processor rules, right, you need to adhere to that, is what my current take is. But it is better answered by your legal team as well if you're doing this processing. But from first look of things, if you ask me, you become a data processor there and you have to adhere to all the clauses which are pertaining to a data processing.
Also here, one key question to be asked also is how the scraping is happening. Is it with the knowledge of the social media app or is it without the knowledge? Because the moment it is without the knowledge, you are anyway going into the security realm. If it is with the knowledge, then you would have some agreement with the social media app to be able to scrape that data. And there are some logistics around it. I think YouTube, Facebook, everybody has that kind of licensing agreements available for you to be able to scrape it.
Okay, so it has to be done under license from the data controller.
Yes.
Okay. But something which is publicly available, still one has to go through the licensing route.
So we had to look at this question recently for one of our customers. And when we looked at LinkedIn, there was a lawsuit against scraping LinkedIn without having a formal licensing agreement from LinkedIn. And it has survived through the US courts. And today it is legal to scrape publicly available information from LinkedIn. But they make it extremely hard to do it. I mean, they're almost like quasi licensing by blocking you very aggressively and things like that. Okay. But it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
Naushad, does that answer your question?
There could be a challenge in identifying the data subjects, whether they are EU residents or outsiders.
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge, Naushad. And that is the first exercise, actually. You have, I would say, a large exercise in identifying your data assets and where it comes from. And these are all questions you need to ask to your tech and product team, or if you have a specialized data sourcing team, them as well. So from a security angle, yeah, this is a valid question. From a compliance team angle. But without the answers to the previous questions, right, the data inventory questions, it's very difficult to arrive at what is the action you need to take on those.
Yeah, thanks, Satish.
Okay, so Samir has a question. Samir, can you ask your question directly?
Yeah, hi Satish. So I was looking at, so there is a lot of talk going on around having metadata tagging to the core data to identify them as PII.
Yeah.
or you build into the system so that the tags or in some way the data is pre-identified through configuration. So while you were describing the architecture, it did not come out clearly in terms of when you say I can identify or use the data catalog across. Were you using a configuration for each data type, or were you using any metadata along with it?
So we use configuration as well as metadata. So let me give you an example.
Okay.
Say if the lineage is coming, right? So that is a data partner level tag which is happening with the data itself. Okay. And if it's a derived attribute or what is the derivation going, that is going as part of additional columns with the same data itself. Okay. Another thing is the actual, what is the other thing? The metadata, right? So we have metadata as well. How do I put it? To just give you an example, say for a data partner, this is a schema which is coming out. So that is coming as a metadata, and that is used for enforcing the validation. I'm not sure if I
okay.
got it.
No, I got it. Yes, I got it. Cool. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, so we have sorry.
Yeah. Now, actually, you can model all this in a graph database. Now, Atlas is giving that, I would say, abstraction on top of JNS graph directly. So you can manage both the stack-based use cases as well as database use cases by using it intelligently.
Yeah, that's there. But then what happens is if you have not tagged all the backdated data, because you would have started configuration at some time. The challenge that a lot of product platforms are struggling with today is the overhaul in the design required to ensure that is enabled before graph can come in and do something.
Yeah.
Or build a outside config layer which can then be used as a schema to map across wherever you find the data.
Correct. So this is I would say a one-time activity. It's not even a reusable activity.
Yes.
So, yeah. Unfortunately, we have to go through that one-time activity at least once. And in a way, if you look at it, right, you build all these stacks and you take your data set and run through these. It becomes a test as well for that one-time activity, whether it is
absolutely
fine or not.
yes. But that's great when it comes to the structured data. The unstructured is still a different challenge altogether. So data that is already outside the system is sort of becoming a challenge now for everybody.
Correct. Unstructured is always a challenge.
Yeah.
The easiest way to tame it is have some versioning and stale data. Just take it out of your system or put it in Glacier. Take it when necessary. Don't use it for any active processing.
Yeah. So one of the things, somebody was telling us that maybe it'll be easier to simply replace all the machines, not give them any access to prior data and see what they really require. Only generate that. So that could be an overhaul that is doable. But then I don't think something like that is feasible. It's just probably a joke that he was going on.
Yeah. Okay. Cool, Samir. Yeah, other questions?
So we have two questions I'm going to club together. One is from Rajat, which is about, he says that you partially answered the question, but he still wants to check, did you consider open source projects or are you looking at them now? There are a few popular ones like Amundsen.
Yeah, Amundsen is from
And he's interested in gathering your inputs on these projects. And then there's one from Naman, which is about why did Zeotap move from AWS to GCP? Was it more driven from cost standpoint or compliance standpoint?
Well, it had nothing to do with compliance per se. It was other business reasons.
Okay.
On Rajat's question, Rajat, we did a POC on the various catalogs available, and within our lens, we saw Atlas to be one of the best out there. Because beyond the basic data catalog, right? If you remember, I had given some use cases around the path cataloging and other items as well. In Zeotap, given the number of pipelines, right? We have like 400 plus pipelines. That itself becomes a management issue. So to manage metadata around things beyond the data's metadata as well, we found Atlas is much more extensible. Amundsen is a very good product. You have to fit it with your use case. I would say run a time box POC. And even cloud providers have started coming out with data catalog. Google just went from beta some 3-4 months back. That is also a decent catalog. You can look at your use cases and cross position. One thing in all these big data systems is always run some kind of use case to your POC to assess whether it is working fine for you, because everybody will claim I'm doing everything, but it doesn't work that way.
Rajat, your follow-up question, or does this answer your query? Okay, I think Rajat may have bandwidth issues. Venkat, I think you have the rest of the questions, so maybe it's just better if you ask them.
Yeah, I got some of them already. Just one thing that I wanted to ask was the lineage is at a column level?
Yes, lineage is at a column level.
And
No, attribute level, sorry.
Attribute.
Attribute
Okay,
level. Yeah.
Now, when you have new policies or the policies change, what happens to already all the previously computed data sets?
So
How
if
do
you
you
look
keep
at it, Venkat, since I have a separation of the identity and profile, okay, my identity is more or less transactional. My profile is more or less snapshots. Okay, it is processed, and whatever ZUID is at that point in time is there, it is attached to that. So what happens is, if I nuke the identifiers in a transactional manner, that particular ZUID and that profile is more or less stale for me. And in the subsequent processing, whenever it happens, it automatically dies a natural death. So even though I have that active data in my system for some time, it dies away in the subsequent processing.
Okay, essentially by creating that one level of indirection, you're removing that mapping.
Yes,
from
exactly. And the mapping, the mapped IDs is transactional. The aggregated as well as the profile things which have the actual data is snapshot. You get it. That's the way it works.
Understood. Oh, that is cool. Yeah, that's all. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Satish, thanks for this presentation. I have noted all the questions, so I'll put them down. And I think there's a request again to share your slides. Your slides seem to be very popular all the time. And if you can hang around a bit, we have a very short presentation from Venkat, and then Samir is going to run a little discussion on how are we gearing ourselves up in terms of all these new regulations that are coming up. So Venkat, can you go next? I think essentially the thought process behind building this checklist, and then the nitty-gritties.
Yeah, sounds good. We are at 5:08. I will take probably 5 to 8 minutes so that there is some time for conversations.
Okay.
So very quickly, what I'm essentially saying is that about several months back when we started looking at PDP, and our clients also started asking, one of the first questions that we had is, what does it even mean to comply? Is there a list of questions that we should answer? And we went around looking to see if there is a comprehensive list. The closest thing that we could get was one of these documents put out by Ikigai. And what we immediately did was to turn that into a machine readable checklist. It's actually fairly comprehensive, and it actually links each question back to the section in the PDP bill itself. And first thing that we did is to organize this, take this from a PDF form into a JSON or CSV form. Second thing that we did was to tag each question with information as to whether it is an architectural question, whether it's a security question, or it's a process question, and so on. And then we have turned it into a usable JSON with all of these elements listed out. This is MIT licensed. This is modeled after the GDPR checklist, which we in our own product, we make it a matter of routine to include this GDPR checklist with every one of the deployments. The intention is the same, that every company, every product is going to have a checklist like this. And some of the aspects that Satish talked about are already they are identified as a set of questions. This won't be enough. The design of this checklist is also such that it is extensible. If other people have other checklists, or they want to modify this checklist and so on, it is all extensible. It's a bunch of Python code along with the original links. It is kosher to use this. We have formal permission from Ikigai itself to use the original content. So that is not a problem. You can see a glimpse of it in a markdown fashion. You can see some of the mappings and the categorization and so on. Also, beyond that, what we did was to layer some workflows around it so that we can share it. This is now, we are prototyping some workflows as part of our product down the line. So you're seeing some of the stuff. Now, the interesting thing here is that from a context standpoint, whatever Satish is doing, Scribble as a company has to replicate that process at a slightly smaller scale across multiple companies. So a lot of the language and the tooling, the metadata handling and a bunch of stuff that Satish was talking about is something that we also have. And as part of that whole infrastructure, we have started building this compliance stack as well. One of the first things that we implemented was a workflow version of the same checklist. This is not open source, but we have the ability to annotate, to attach documents, to link it to data sets, leave comments, assign responsibilities, and a bunch of stuff like that. I won't go into these details, but the idea is that the experience that Satish had is we are also getting pushed roughly in the same direction, the hierarchical, the stack that he had, and also the rules. One other potential open source that we have not put out, if any of the folks in the community are interested, I'm happy to help open source it. It is designed to be open sourced one day, is a classifier. Let's say you have a crawler that goes off, picks up these available metadata where it is available, as well as snippets of the data sets wherever in your S3 and your databases. Let's say that it is available. The step beyond that is to classify based on variety of considerations. It could be quality considerations, it could be security or compliance considerations. There is a separate Python module that we made that actually goes through, that allows specifications of these rules as a starting point. And it goes and tags all of the available data sets in an automated fashion. This is this is still work in progress. We haven't worked on it for the past 4-5 months. We got too busy. But if somebody in the community is interested in picking up and looking at it, I would be happy to share this. We have a third project also in mind, open source project, which is about metadata standardization, so that some of these tools are actually reusable across companies. These are not reusable unless there is a standardization of the underlying, how you represent the schemas and things like that. So we would be interested in seeing if anybody else is wants to work on the metadata standardization for that as well. So let me leave it here. You can get in touch with me, or this is you can find it on my GitHub. I will add a link to the I'll post an update with the link to this repository.
Okay.
Hey Venkat, a lot of things that are here, like the assessment or even the data classification, is something that we have built as part of the platform for running a privacy program as well. So I think
Wonderful.
that's something that we can kind of look at together and also see how it can be integrated to make it
Yeah,
more robust. Plus
absolutely.
extent. Also,
Extensively.
I think this goes in with the privacy by design thing that we had been discussing. So let
Yeah,
me push that framework out. A lot of things will get linked together then.
absolutely. That is the idea. If we
Hmm.
have at a community level broad processes and a bunch of tooling that will address various problems along the
Absolutely.
way, it will make it much easier for people to comply.
Agreed, agreed. Fully.
Venkat, this PDF is fantastic, Ikigai.
Ikigai,
Going
yeah,
through that. Yeah. And this,
absolutely.
I just have a broad doubt on that metadata standardization.
Yeah.
Are you looking at a vertical specific standardization? Can you give a practical example of how that will work?
In the data enrichment, right? You are talking. I mean, many of the your workflows is actually we do a bunch of that for customers, except that ours is a very little more generalizable and customizable platform, so that you can keep making copies of it across customers. But in all cases, what happens is that we first of all access a lot of raw data and also generate a lot of derived data sets, and for auditability purposes we generate a lot of metadata. When was this generated, how was this generated, what do we know about the statistical characteristics of a given column, maybe even visualization and so on. We are every day we are adding more and more stuff to the metadata at a data set level, at a column level, at a process level, and so on. The challenge that I see is that when I go into any customer environment, they have data sets produced by a variety of processes, sometimes in Spark, sometimes in SQL, sometimes in R, and so on. And if a company wants to implement any kind of metadata post processing, handling, and so on, there has to be something common across all of these different systems. We are able to, because we control our deployment, we are able to impose metadata standards on all of the data sets that we generate, right?
Okay. Okay.
But we can't link it to any other data set in the customer's environment.
Understood. Understood. Okay. 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 And that PDP classifier currently it's a heuristic based, or you are having some intelligence behind it?
So it is so first thing that it does is it looks at let's say you have 100,000 paths, right? First thing that it does is actually it clusters them, saying that should we treat all of this subset of files together, so that you can reduce what all you need to process. Then it extracts the samples and it applies a set of heuristics to say this is sensitive or this is not sensitive.
Okay.
But the way it is written is that it is extensible for you to apply ever more sophisticated algorithms there.
Understood. Understood. Great. Great,
We
Venkat.
didn't have the time to develop it further. That was the main challenge that we have with that.
Always that is a challenge. Right.
Uh, but it's a I mean, when I look at we alone, ours, for a customer, our system alone has generated 100,000 data sets, right? But we have a strong handle on that. They have a million other data sets in their system that nobody has any idea about.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
That's all. I'm good. Samir, over to you.
Yeah, Samir, let's jump into the.
Okay, so I think we already ended up doing a lot of discussion around compliance laws and all that. And thanks, Satish, for that insight, as well as Venkat for what work has been going on. So today's birds of feather, we wanted to focus on some key things. So there has been a lot of what do you say mental unrest that has been going on thanks to various regulations that are coming. So we have the India PDP, we have the non-personal data, and now we have some guidelines coming around data sharing. There is this e-commerce law. There is something that the Aadhaar Act also says. So there is a bunch of things that are being spoken about at the same time. especially when it comes to the whole data governance and within data governance, privacy as well as the non-personal data and all that. Just to clarify, one of the things that we've been seeing around the world, and we've been speaking about it as well, is that there is a concept of a national law in which we typically call as the horizontal law. So you have to look at the India PDP as a national law, where it is going to be so generic in nature that trying to make sense of it or trying to apply it to an industry is going to be a very tough challenge. So there has to be something that will come into the intermediary, and that is how the national law works. So the intermediary is where regulated industries are going to come in. So somebody like RBI for banks and insurance will come out with its own set of rules in terms of how the privacy needs to work. People like the IRDA, SEBI will come out of their own rules, similar to what you're seeing in the cybersecurity space now. So there is a National IT Act, and then each industry has its own cybersecurity framework or rules as well, which largely align but gives you more specifics. So as an example, you have a right to delete situation in the India PDPP. So India PDPP may say right to delete is available for users as a right that they can exercise. The RBI may further come up and say, hey, yes, you have a right to delete. However, in a bank, when you go for a right to delete, it will likely be a right to forget and not really delete all the data. If you have an ongoing loan or an ongoing contract, or you have a account with the bank, then they will not be able to delete your data. They may be able to forget you from cross-sell, from sending additional mailers, marketing and all that. And whenever it ends, you may be able to delete all the data, or delete with a condition that we need to store certain data for 3 years and all that. In the way going forward, the same industry or the vertical regulator can also come up with saying, hey, the name of a person needs to be masked. So the India PDP may say this name need not be masked or is not sensitive, need not be encrypted. But RBI may come up and say, no, I want you to mask or I want you to encrypt. So that is where rules differ. And therefore, all our implementations and all need to take care of these configurations differently. Why we thought before we jump into the questions, we should bring this out is because we've been hearing a lot of angst around the whole India PDP implementation and all. And somewhere we realized that you look at a very generic statement in the India PDP and then everybody just wants to try and interpret it and implement, which is going to be a tough call. Primarily because if you see GDPR also, GDPR as per law, and then there is an authority which keeps providing guidance. So unless the authority comes, and a lot of things in the current bill is kind of leaving it to the authority. So unless the authority comes and really starts spelling out, there is a lot of ambiguity that is going to be there, plus the industry verticals that are going to come into this. So having said this and given this as a context to Satish and Venkat and anybody else who wants to answer as well, one of the initial questions, and this is something that everybody has had in their mind, is that we currently have so many different regulations that are coming up and speaking about privacy in a way or about data in another way, like the NPD, PDPP. You now have a report from Niti Aayog which says how data sharing can be done. You have various state governments, industry verticals, you have the regulators of industry, then you have the CERT-in or the IT Act on the other hand, who have their own regulations that keep coming up. What challenges do you see, especially from an India standpoint or even a global standpoint, when you see when you have data at the core of your business and you have to kind of look at compliances across so many different varieties? So Satish, maybe you can go first, and then we can have Venkat and anybody else who wants to contribute as well.
Okay. Samir, can you just rephrase the last question you asked?
So when data is at the core of your business and you now have India PDP that comes, then you have a non-personal data bill that comes, and your data is going to be a convergence of both.
Correct.
Plus, you now when you're working for telecom as a regulator has its own sets. You're working for an insurance aggregate, they have their own sets. So how do you look at compliance and how do you think this is going to work going forward, especially for the data business?
Well, I think last week we discussed on the same. So for data business, my take is becoming difficult and difficult if you are especially a third party data business in this whole this thing. In the sense there is, see, all the tech which you have built, right? It comes at a cost. Okay. And especially if you are in data business like a Facebook or Google, it becomes as another line item in their cost. But for a startup, these all comes at a cost, and it is not like just a initial one-time cost, right? It keeps on accruing on a month-on-month basis with newer and newer data set coming out and stuff like that. So that is one but a major inhibition, and we have to somehow adjust the cost on the sales of the data. So that puts it at a little disadvantage in terms of the actual data sales. That is one of the reasons many of these data companies are looking at more of a tool provider rather than being a data provider alone as well, right? Across the
Correct.
spectrum. Be it US is still not that strict. So if you look at any thriving data company, US would be the first market there. But in other market, I think it is becoming more difficult with all these. But still, if you have a I would say access to a particular niche data set or a very niche algorithm, which you have some IP rights over it or you have some protection over it, then I still believe you can still be in business and charge a premium and kind of accommodate these whole things. But in terms of running a data business, definitely all these laws are going to make your road tougher going ahead. There is no second thoughts about it.
Makes sense. So like you said, yes, as the going gets tough, we will probably have to find out more workarounds to make sure it happens. Can't rule out business.
Correct. And I think just like whatever Venkata showcased, right? The
Yeah.
tooling and all has a very big opportunity there. It may not be for data business, but for any business actually. If you're building a SaaS tool which can help you in this compliance aspect using some tech, then that is a great opportunity if you look at it.
Yeah, and I guess you just have to make sure that there are enough consumers to avail it as well.
Yeah, but hopefully,
Businesses
Venkata,
rather.
I don't know what is his liability clauses.
Venkat, you want to answer that?
Yeah. I mean, with one of our customers, I actually signed a contract that says that I will go to jail and my company will shut down. Right. Thankfully, the customer has ended, and now we have actual lawyers looking at all the contracts. Otherwise,
Yeah, that is
Yeah,
another
I think
aspect.
all startups at some point have done that. All the founders.
Yeah. Actually, many times, right? Startups don't have the specialized legal team as well. And if you're running a data business internally, a specialized legal team and this chief data protection officer, or however you want to call them, right? Chief security officer. That also
So the
becomes.
founder is everything, no? The
Yeah.
chief legal, the chief
Yeah.
data officer, whatever.
Yeah.
so one challenge, I mean, when I look at my customers and the prospects that I'm talking to, right, the cost of data overall, the complexity of the data systems, the cost of the engineers, as well as the cost of compliance is growing very fast, and the economics of the business is it's not clear that it can support all of these huge costs. The ROI is a big question in my with a bunch of people that I'm talking to. And
Yeah, I
compliance is
think we have seen that kind of compliance costs coming up for the Sabanas Oxley as well. So it also had an initial very high, and then somewhere they started leaning it down.
See, this is Rohit here. I feel
Hello,
Rohit.
Rohit.
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah, now we
Yeah,
can hear
we can hear you now.
Yeah, this is Rohit. You see, I feel data businesses will be subject to host of compliance requirements, including registration, monitoring of operation, and disclosure obligation. So this will increase operational and data storage cost, and hinder the ability of, say, especially Indian startups to develop their services. So, it can create pervasive incentives for these companies to remain small. It could be, I'm just, if you want, I'll explain this from a proposed NDP bill. Because if you see the proposed NDP bill proposes mandatory data sharing by anyone collecting the data above a certain threshold. So under the proposed framework, if you see all these tech companies and organizations, they have to meet currently undefined threshold limit of collecting data or process data. So this is bound to increase, and these businesses will be subject to host of compliance requirements. Like including registration and monitoring of operation and disclosure obligations. So this is definitely going to increase operational and data storage cost.
Yeah, so Rohit, just one thing. Anyway, the NPD is open for discussion right now. Plus, I think there's a bunch of representations already happening. So yes, I guess everybody understands there are issues there. But now right now in this forum, we're more interested in understanding that while all these compliances are there, how as companies or as a data business can people work towards it. So before you go forward, Rohit, Venkat, any views there? Because we started with compliance on a different note, but then it tapered off. So just wanted to check with you.
What is the particular question?
The question that I had asked Satish in terms of multiple compliances coming in, how as a data business we can gear up to manage, and is it even manageable, and is it even feasible? You were mentioning, I think, about tools, which is what Satish was also saying. And then we kind of moved off to a different set of answers. So just bringing back the topic.
Correct. I think in my mind, at least, I'm not so worried about whether the compliance is horizontal or vertical, right? Vertical means you're just like how Satish built out the stack, right? There is a lot of clarity that this is exactly what needs to happen. And the same thing is, for example, the same set of rules apply for these account aggregators and things like that. My main concern around all of this is whenever I go into any enterprise environment, I find that it is very chaotic. The data engineers are very indisciplined. The data scientists are indisciplined. These analysts export data like crazy into Excels, and we don't know after that what happens to the data. My main concern around all of this is we are dealing with a capacity challenge more than anything else. The people with the kinds of mindsets and understanding and the tooling skill to be able to build out all of this stuff. I mean, it is none of this thing is rocket science. We can, if we put our heads together, we can think of processes, tools, and so on. The question is, I when I meet all of the data engineers, I don't have the confidence in them that they can actually think through all of this stuff. How many Satishes are there in this country, for example, right? So the my emphasis has tended to be more on the people and the process and the organization front than on the technology front. Yes, I mean, it will help greatly if the tools are available, community-wide tools which embed knowledge and things like that. But where are the people going to come from? Where are the privacy engineers going to come from? You should tell me.
Good question. Even I have the same question. That's why we are trying to train as many people as we can so that at least we start building them up. Or maybe, like Satish said, build tools more, and probably that's the way to go, because at least even in security, we are seeing the same thing. There are no security engineers around. Skills are scarce.
Correct. And the other thing is that
Mhm.
other reason to go down the tools path. I mean, I gauge this, by reading between the lines, is that there is lack of trust intra-organization also. Whether these processes, tools are being applied properly and so on. So one reason they want to see tools is that they want a system that is person independent and something that is auditable by anybody in the organization at any point in time.
Yeah. Sort of in
So
a way works without bias.
works without bias, and now I as a CEO I feel little more safer than handing this responsibility to my engineer who I have like doubts about at the back of my mind.
Agreed.
It's very interesting. I mean, how this psychology of the organizations also is playing out.
Yes, very interesting, really. Rohit, you were also saying from a cost of compliance point of view. So while these multiple things are coming in, your view was that the cost of compliance is really going to go up. You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you see, I mean, because all these bills are still and have not been implemented, So I personally feel, companies will be subject to excessive compliance, and data sharing framework. So when they are subject to this, so this is definitely going to increase the operational and data storage cost, And I'm just saying from a long-term point of view, you see a lot of startups coming, so they will say it will create kind of a perverse incentive for them to remain small, because I'm just saying from a, say, if the proposed NDP bill comes into picture, if it becomes a law, and when they talk about volume-based threshold, there's still a lot of ambiguity in that bill. So this kind of like if you talk from volume-based threshold for compliance, it is going to have the same results which such kind of frameworks had for India's manufacturing sector. So the firms prefer to remain small because they don't want to get into the hassles of getting them. They would simply want to avoid compliance.
Yeah, so rather than being the enabler or the facilitator to create a level playing field, it actually creates a larger issue for people.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So, a related way, Satish, one question that I have is now we are seeing a lot of the compliance related discussion happening from a regulation level. But what happens to industries that are not regulated but are still having a lot of data related? Like when you do analytics for, let's say, a manufacturing company or even to do sales forecasting and all. Now, what happens there? And how critical is the whole privacy conundrum for these companies which are not regulated as well?
Well, it's pretty fragmented, Samir. I'll draw from my experience when I was in my past companies where I was working in oil and gas sector. So it is driven mostly by, see, the most of the compliance is talking about you have around healthcare. That is one thing, and you have
Yes.
decent terms on telecom data. But if you go around it, it is mostly about a data which is related to a person, which is at the end of the day, the person is the crux, a person or a device which is identified to the person. But otherwise, I think it's pretty fragmented. People have their own internal policies. Sometimes there are vertical level policies which helps you out there. But it is heavily fragmented. Building a framework for that currently, in my opinion, would be kind of futile. You should be crossing the bridge when you're there if you're creating a niche for that particular vertical.
Okay. Venkat, any other views on this? Or you have the same opinion? Hello?
No, I think the economics of this data business is definitely changing. Whether the PDP law comes or not, whether the NDP law comes or not, worldwide, if you look at it, the concerns around data are growing across the board, with or without the law. And lots of consumer-driven enforcement is also at play. So in all cases, what we are talking about is increasing data costs. It is not going to be the playground like it was for the past 5 to 10 years. You can't just produce a model. If you have a data system that is part of your product or your company, it better be defensible to internal stakeholders, to your customers, as well as potentially to regulatory authorities. Nobody can escape that. I mean, the increased compliance cost is almost like a given. I think the question here in my mind is how many of the current companies and business models will survive this increased cost, and how much of it will not, because a lot of the costs have been externalized. For example, I know a unicorn in this city that is buying data that has been not exactly stolen, but the process is pretty close to it, right? Because the literacy level of the end users is very low. Now, if this unicorn were to be caught doing that, the impact on its valuation will be very significant. So those kinds of hidden costs are there in many, hidden risks are there in organizations, and we don't know how this will play out. A lot of it will depend upon the enforcement of the law itself.
Interesting. So what in a way you're saying is what ties into what I wanted to ask next also is should should businesses be worried about the whole privacy and security thing, irrespective of the law or the regulation? So while the law regulation gives some structure, otherwise also it looks like businesses should be worried about it, and there is enough fallout happening if you are not going down that path. So it's not a question of if, it's always a question of when now. So Satish, Venkat, any views you have there?
So the thing is, it is not just about a fear factor, right, Samir? The thing is, this is
Yes.
also an opportunity to educate the end users in the right manner. Previously, they were taken for granted in terms of collecting their data and flowing it unregulated across layers, across into systems, across companies. So I believe this regulation helps streamline that, and user is also much more aware that what he's being used for and what are the services he'll get out of it. So I believe at least the PDP, NPD is much controversial in terms of the data sharing and all these things, as Rohit told. But I believe a PDP kind of law, if you implement it the right way, is actually beneficial, and you can target your end users even better than what you are doing before, is what I believe. Of course, there is a cost of compliance there, but I think it is done for the wellness of the business as well. You can convert it.
No, the thing is that
Okay.
today data business is global business. I mean, sitting in Bangalore, we are pitching to companies in Brazil and Mexico and Hungary and everywhere else. Data business is global business. If PDP does not get passed, very soon we'll be out of the global data business, because there is a broad convergence. We did a survey, Scribble as a company, we did a survey of these data protection laws across geographies. And there are some differences and so on, but everybody now thinks that data is serious business. I mean, you can't not regulate it. So this
That
is
I
happening.
agree. Sorry, go ahead, Venkat.
So one way or other, I think just the strategic and the national competitiveness level, from that perspective, PDP is happening, right? We might quibble about the details, but without that, there is no data business.
Yes. So globally, we will become a pariah if we don't have this soon. And the way I think it is going now, EU has also scrapped the US privacy shield, which basically means they also don't have the same protection. They are going to have the same privacy impacts as we have. And so that way, yes, it's something that is on the anvil. Whether we like it or not, we might as well take steps to take care of it and also ensure that the law gets passed. So,
yes, we are looking.
good.
So in the last 3 weeks, I'll just wait with one more point. I don't want to occupy too much of the channel also.
No,
One
sure,
thing
go ahead.
we have been doing at Scribble in the last 3-4 weeks is to go through the legal conversations that are happening in US and Europe. And one thing that is there is that they're looking well beyond privacy law, right? The data protection, the CCPAs of the world are considered necessary but not sufficient. Now it's a question of what
Yes.
else is going to come down the line. I'm almost certain that it's coming, where there are new regulations coming.
And at the same time, there is technological innovations happening. So as always, regulations have always been in the board where they are falling behind technology. And therefore, in a way, technology or the whole business always feels that any regulation that comes in is coming in to curtail me and not really help me grow the business, which is a serious thought process that keeps happening. So one of the things, that I had also been speaking earlier with all of you is where we as a community create standards and also send it to the regulator saying this is one way in which sort of a self-regulation can be done, which helps us and the business as well as helps the country framing the right laws as well, so that there's less ambiguity in the whole thing. I don't know how we are going to achieve that, but at some point maybe that will help. Anybody else has questions, any other inputs that you want to speak here? Anything that you feel is important enough to pick up? Otherwise, we can look at an end to the session.
I would only say that India needs to implement this PDP bill on a top priority basis,
Absolutely agree with that fully.
NPD and all this all the compliance can come later, because implementing PDP itself will be a big challenge, But to start
Yes.
with what Satish said, India needs to implement PDP bill. There are a lot of ambiguity with regard to NDP, this non-data personal bill, but with a lot of discussions, things can improve, right? But PDP bill has to be implemented on a top priority basis because privacy is going to be a very big thing, and especially for if you see this post-COVID scenario, even the healthcare sector in India has to evolve. Now, if healthcare sector in India has to evolve, you need to have a privacy law in place.
Agreed. In fact, even the NPD, one of the data types of NPD is anonymized data from personal data. So
Right.
anyways, unless the privacy bill comes in, even the NPD will not have the necessary teeth that it requires. And purely from a business standpoint, I agree. I mean, we were working with clients and through their contracts with Europe and all, or even the US, we've been seeing increasing requirements of how you are doing it. And simply because the bill is not there, the first kind of opinion is that you may not have anything there because you don't have a local law. And it kind of becomes binding. They have to do a lot more justifications. It is just going to help in a business standpoint.
You mentioned about the Niti Aayog. Are you talking about the DIPA or whatever, the data empowerment business, NPCI generalization or something else?
No, this is on the PDP portions only. That the privacy bill needs to be there.
What is it saying?
The which one? The DEPA?
No, you mentioned about something that came out of Niti Aayog, right?
No. So the Niti Aayog was more purely in terms of data sharing. What I was saying that even if the Niti Aayog or NPD we look at, all of these are still dependent on the primary privacy bill to be passed. Only then it can come in. So the Niti Aayog just, if I'm not mistaken, whatever I've seen, it simply puts out saying data sharing has to be done via APIs and all that. I don't think it is really taking a position. It's trying to create more of a national framework. But if any other thoughts, I'm happy to hear that.
Is this the same as DIPA or some other document?
Same as DIPA.
Okay, understood.
Actually, DIPA only, not same as.
Okay, take it.
So that must be impactful for you in the data business, right?
Well, actually, that was a little more targeted towards NPCI and UPI because
the payment aggregators.
Single vendor market, that is not good. So they want to generalize that. That's how I read it. For that kind of data sharing to happen, there needs to be a regulator and coordinating body, because it is now essentially they're creating an interoperability between like thousands of organizations. So I'm not seeing DAPA being extended to every other domain. I don't see how it will happen.
My reading is it is going more in the lines of the Aadhaar portion than anything else. The way they are trying to put Aadhaar is the way they are trying to create, use DEPA to create that central infrastructure as well. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it will go beyond too much, or it will become a position paper, but it's more within the government rather than impacting the private businesses.
Historically, India does not have this community-led standards development like IETF and things like that. The company cultures and things, and the people's who are so resume driven are not as excited. Even if there are contributions to the community standards from India, it tends to be to these international standards. So I'm
Yes.
not sure how this will play out.
Yeah, I think this is something that we need to look at because at some point, so whether we become a local chapter and then use that to frame the community, or we use the Data Security Council type of thing to create our own bodies. But I have a feeling that the amount of innovation and development that is happening here, plus the kind of products we are speaking out within India, it's best that we do it sooner rather than later, because it's going to help us in the effort as well to make the whole regulations thing easier and also the regulators to understand our position.
Yeah, I agree to that, Venkat. Community-driven thing is very, very weak in India in any of the items actually. Unlike say, Europe is far ahead in that, especially the Scandinavian countries, but India, I believe, is very backward in that.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Zainab,
Yes,
I think we are good.
Yes, thanks a lot, Satish, Venkat, Rohit, Samir for sticking around. I think Tausif had an interesting thought, so he will drop an update. Venkat, you can update. You can send an update today about your about the PDP checklist and a few of the
I
things
already
that we
did.
spoke about. Ah, great. All right. So yeah, I think that's about it. We'll meet at the. Sorry, yeah.
One thing that I was thinking about is when you're thinking about the next 3-4 months, right?
Yeah.
What are you seeing from a HasGeeks point of view? What are the things that you are thinking about in terms of activities?
So I think the data governance discussion is kind of going quite strong right now, both with the NPD meetings and what we've been doing here. So the one thing is, in fact, I was going to compile from all the resources and all that, and the document we had to kind of write a response and then share with all of us to see who wants to review it and if there are folks who are willing to endorse it. So I think that's one thing we need to do. The other is I mean just thinking about Satish's remark that yeah, I mean community efforts in India have been quite weak, but then there have also been some successes. Like I know the Save the Internet campaign came from a volunteer driven effort, so it's a question to see like what templates we can derive from some of these, although those were different kinds of community involvement. Here, like I think Sami's also been talking about it, is we'll have to build some of these resources and sort of build a voice that can sort of respond to the situations that are to come. Like this was captured, it's far better. So I think this is largely it, and of course the regular activities will happen. I've been trying to speak to Suchna about whether we can actually start a working group on ethics. I think that's something in the pipeline, since there are a bunch of startups that are now trying to look at these issues of ethics. And yeah, I think the other is to look at ML ops, given some of the stuff that Venkat you all started with Scribble, and whether we want to build a little forum for people who want to talk about this intersection between machine learning and operations.
I mean, I was mostly talking around the privacy,
Yeah.
but that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, so I think the privacy thing is just going to get stronger as we go. So some of these case studies are useful, and I think also, yeah, we'll have to start thinking about how to start compiling these resources.
Also, Zainab, I think along with privacy, we should include security as well, because somehow that goes hand in hand, and there's a lot of focus on security that will also come thanks to the whole privacy requirements.
Yeah, absolutely, Samir, agree with you.
Okay.
Great. So that's about it. We'll continue some of these conversations, some of the groups that we are part of. Satish, thanks a lot for the back-to-back sessions. I think it's been wonderful having you, and I think every time you've brought in this touch of pragmatism, which everybody's been very struck by. So I think it's been wonderful having you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. Have a good
Okay.
Saturday.
Yep.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, Satish. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.